Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to teach English to low-level learners. Sorry, how to teach English for work to low-level learners. This webinar is by Margaret O'Keeffe, who is based in Barcelona, Spain. She teaches both General English and Business English to adults and young adults. She is a speaking examiner for Cambridge English Assessment, a presenter at ELT events, and a materials writer. She has co-authored several course books, including Market Leader, English for International Tourism, Lifestyle, and Business Partner. There will be time for questions at the end of this webinar, but with that, I'll leave you in Margaret's hands. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Richard. I hope you can all hear me clearly. If not, do let us know in the chat box and we see if we can do something about that. To start with today, I'm going to sorry, I should start here with the housekeeping. Just to give you a few things at the beginning of the presentation to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and that it will be on YouTube, and you will get a link to that within 2 weeks via your email. So you'll also get that. You'll also get a certificate, and you'll also get a virtual goodie bag, and you find out what that is when you get your goodie bag. The title then, as Richard said, is How to Teach English for Work to Low-Level Learners. And here's a little rundown of what we're going to be looking at in today's session. An overview of what I mean by low-level learners, the A1 and A2 levels. A very brief look at what are some of the factors that influence the success in language learning. Then we're going to look at the type of vocabulary that students need for work. And we're going to look at how we can maximize student speaking time in the class, even at these very low levels. And we're going to look at how we can help students with their communication skills for work by providing support and scaffolding. And then, as Richard said, at the end, we'll leave time at the end for questions. Do write your questions in the chat box, and they'll be picked up, and we can come back to those later. You can see on this first slide here, I've included some spring flowers, and there will be 8 pictures of spring flowers throughout the presentation. So see if you can spot them and if you know what they are. So let's start with what are A1 and A2 level learners by referring to the Common European Framework references for languages and the global scale of English. Now, here's an abbreviation of what's in the Common European Framework. And it describes both A1 and A2 level learners as basic users. That's very, very important to remember that. And I've just highlighted a few of the key phrases from this abbreviation. So the first description on the left there is for A1, and it says I can understand and use familiar everyday expressions, very basic phrases, can interact in a simple way. That's the A1 learners. They're not complete beginners, A1 learners. They're what we used to call false beginners. So they do have some language that they've picked up maybe a long time ago at school, or informally, casually, through travel, through talking to colleagues, whatever, but they do have some language. A2 level is a little bit, obviously a little bit higher, that they can understand sentences and frequently used expressions that are of most immediate relevance. And from this, our context is going to be most immediate relevance for what they need at work. They can communicate in simple and routine tasks, simple and direct exchanges on familiar and routine matters. So it's very basic. They're not doing sophisticated business transactions here. They're doing very simple things in the workplace. And we'll be looking at some examples today. The other thing I'd like to mention about the levels is that if you go to the global scale of English, you get a lot more detailed descriptors of what adult learners and professionals can do at these 2 levels. You can go to english.com and you'll see the section Global Scale of English, and there's a teacher's toolkit there that's all free that you can look in, and you can see the kind of descriptors that are there for what students can do at A1 and A2 level. I've just picked out a couple of examples here to give you an idea of this, and this is what has informed our writing in the Business Partner series for the A1 and A2 levels. We've looked at these descriptors. So you can see for A1, for the writing, First one is a writing descriptor. It says can complete simple forms with basic personal details. And I'll be showing you a way that we do that. They're going to look at a lesson today of how we do that in the course book. For speaking, can introduce someone in a basic way, give their names and job titles. So those are some of the sort of things that they can do at A1 level. The other things, other type of descriptors for A1 are can write a few basic sentences given prompts or a model. So prompts and models are very important at this level. For A2, we've got for writing, can write basic personal details for a website profile. Another one is can write a simple text, for example, invitations, given a model. So models are important. For speaking for A2, we've got another example here. Can answer simple questions on the phone using fixed expressions. So we're hoping that A2 level, we can give them practice of telephoning language. Not at A1, but certainly A2. And I find telephoning is really challenging for my learners, even at higher levels. So to give them that practice, I think is really, really valuable. Another example of a speaking descriptor for A2 from the Global Scale of English is this one. Can conduct very simple business transactions using basic language. So, you know, this is what we're talking about here. As I say, you can go into english.com, look at the Global Scale of English, get the teacher's toolkit and look at the kind of things that are there in terms of learning objectives for your lessons, the grammar and vocabulary, all mapped to the Common European Framework and the Global Scale of English. Okay, I've got a question for you now. I'd like you to type in your the chat box. And the question is this. Can you think of some factors that are important for success as a language learner? To be a successful language learner, can you think of any factors that might influence that? Right, a couple of answers there, and I'm going to have a look, see what you've got. Yes, dedication, motivated, ambitious, absolutely. Risk-taking is a good one. Yes, 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 yes. Perfect, perfect. Intrinsic motivation, totally, totally, totally. Yeah, yeah. Yes, practice, absolutely. Patience, totally. Yeah. Yes, I think the teacher's attitude is also really, really important. The teacher has a big influence here, and particularly at this first level, which is exactly why I've brought this up. Yes, you have to enjoy it. Absolutely, enjoyment is a very big part of it. Thank you. That's brilliant. I'm going to put up a little list that I've done, and you've mentioned all of those things, I think. Okay, so there are a lot of factors. There could be social factors, demographic factors, but two key areas I think that are very important for the low-level learners are cognitive factors and affective factors. So the thing about to be a good language learner, you need a good memory. And, you know, if students haven't been in the classroom for a long time or they haven't studied English formally before, then they might they might not have that much practice of memory training, something that we can do in class to help them with their memory, to help them feel more confident about developing their vocabulary. Language aptitude is obviously something that's innate. Some people have a better ear for language, some people don't, but you can still help them with strategies when it comes to their aptitude to help them get more practice. And this is the other thing. Some students have the learning strategies and they're good at note taking, they're good at using the language, the new language that they hear. And some students need more help with strategies, and we can certainly help our students, particularly at these low levels. That kind of learning strategies are really, really helpful, and memory training is part of that, and I'll be looking at that today. And obviously there's all the things that you mentioned as well, the intrinsic and also extrinsic motivation, particularly in a training situation. How happy are you be in training, or just find it something, an imposition that your company has put on you? What's your attitude? Do you feel positive about learning a language? Very important as well at this low levels. It's this anxiety about ability and feeling that they're not going to be able to manage, especially if they're adult learners who are suddenly being thrown in at the beginning of something. So they're very competent in their jobs and very competent in lots of other areas of their life, and they're suddenly feeling exposed. And so part of our job is very much about building their confidence and giving a can-do attitude. So I think those are important things to bear in mind with the low-level learners in particular. So let's go on to the next section, which is about vocabulary learning. And one of the things when we were researching the Business Partners series was that we talked to teachers from all around the world about the A1 and A2 level when we were producing the A1 and A2 levels. And what came back very firmly was a #1 priority for their learners was vocabulary. And that's an obvious result. And obviously, it's not just individual words, that's one type of vocabulary, but also useful expressions for those everyday situations they're going to find themselves in, like greeting people and saying hello and saying goodbye and talking about routines at work, and also functional language for situations. So those are 3 real areas of vocabulary that we can work on at these levels. Let me give you an example of some high frequency vocabulary that's useful here. This is an example from the first unit of the A1 level, and it's lesson 3. And the aim of this lesson is to talk about my company. As you can see, there's a lesson outcome box there that says learners can describe their company and workplace. So it starts off very, very simply with some basic vocabulary for workplaces. As you can see there, warehouse, office, and factory. Now, what's interesting about this is that when you look at the level of those words, only office is one that you might expect a complete beginner or a false beginner to already know, possibly they've picked up. Whereas the others are much higher level, warehouse and factory are much higher level words. So what we're saying here is very important, is the kind of high frequency vocabulary that students need at A1 and A2 level are not necessarily A1 and A2 words. What marks the level of the course is the grammar structures and the simplicity of the sentence structures. So that's very important to remember, that the vocabulary that they need that's high frequency is not necessarily A1 or all A2 vocabulary. If you're interested in finding out more about the GSE vocabulary inventory, that again, as I say, is part of the GSE teacher toolkit. Okay, so let's move on and look at how we can start to present vocabulary in a lesson. Here's a lesson from the very first unit of first exercise from the very first unit of the A1 level. And as you can see here, the kind of things that we can do to present language in context and can be just things like simple sentences. So here they get to match two sentences, and then put them into the correct dialogue. So that's one type of simple text that we can use to help present language, also with the visual support there. The other types of things that students can do at A1 and A2 levels are things like, or a simple text, I'll show you, can be other things as well. Okay, obviously picture matching and word matching is another type of example. This is from the first lesson again. Here is from the second lesson in the course book, which is about talking about filling in forms with your personal details. And here the language is presented in context via an employee identity card, so a very simple piece of text, and also a very short dialogue. So there's other ways, I mean, short dialogues are texts basically, and they can be used to present language. Obviously, other ways to present language, as we saw earlier, is when you just give them a picture and the word with the picture. And that's very early on. So to start them off, just give them a couple of words to get the lesson going. And then we're going to build up, how we build up in the lesson. You also might do that kind of thing where you're matching pictures and words. So let's look at how we build up. I'm going to go through one lesson here. As I said, this is lesson 2 in the very first unit of A1 level. And what students are getting is a nice piece of realia, their employee ID card there, and then a conversation about that card to complete the missing words. And these are words to do with personal details: address, email address, ID card, phone number, passport, exactly. And then to build up from that, we can go into a bit more detail. We've started off with 4 words and personal details. Now we're going into a bit more detail. And again, another simple text to give the context for the language is like this hotel registration form. And what they're doing here is matching the items. Some of these items have already seen in exercise 1. It's been expanded a little bit in exercise 2. Then they get a little bit of practice with it, filling out their own registration form for a hotel. And then we've done something here that's very useful, I think, for students is the text is just an email address. Now, there is so much that can be done with an email address. It's amazing. First off, you're going to revise the alphabet with the students. Then you're going to look at the punctuation of email addresses, things like the at and the dot. And then obviously from that, the students can get some listening practice where they can write down the answers. And then they can obviously practice saying email addresses as well. Now, this is something, again, if you're teaching online at the moment, then I think when you want to check the answers, you can easily put the students into breakout rooms to check the answers before you do it as with the whole class. And that actually is quite useful for students to be able to compare their answers together, because then again, they'll be practicing the email addresses themselves as they're saying them and checking with each other. And then they can come back and check with you in class if you think they might have problems with it. So the other interesting thing about this is that with the listenings, I should mention this, all the listenings and all the video from the course book, students have access via My English Lab to all the audio and all the video. And that means that they can then go, and they've obviously in their course books as well got the scripts. So this is something that not only in class, but after class they could do, or you could even do it before class if you want to do the flipped class method. So there's lots of things that students can start doing as part of learner training to help practice and revise and prepare in advance for classes. And I find that some of my keenest students will actually go to the materials before the class and have done some of this already, which I think is actually great practice. Let's have a look at how we're going to carry on practicing in this lesson. So this is all the same lesson about filling in forms, personal details. And we're going to exercise 5 now, and it's a new context, but it's the same personal details, but now it's listening and reading a new employee registration form and completing the details. So now we've upped the challenge a little bit more here. We've given them a new context. They're repeating it, so some of what they've already done, but we're making it a little more challenging. And there's lots of integrated skills work going on in this lesson. It's not just vocabulary. There's lots of, there's writing going on, there's reading, listening, and they're going to do some speaking with it as well. So once the students have done this, then we're going to look at some more useful vocabulary from that conversation that they've heard with the new employee form, registration form, where they're going to match bits of the useful questions that they're going to need for their own speaking task. Now, once they've done this matching exercise, I think it's really useful to drill the language, so students have got a very good model for pronunciation before they do their speaking activity. And I think it's good if you can in advance anticipate the kind of problems your students are going to have and highlight those things. So I know with my students, they're going to have problems with the sound in surname, with the vowel sound. The same with first, they're going to have problems with that. With a word like nationality, I know they're going to have problems with the word stress. So it's good to practice key sounds that they're going to find difficult. It's good to practice word stress, and then the whole phrase as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about drilling in a while. So now students can go on to their own speaking task where they're filling in pairs, where they're filling in registration forms for each other. And this, again, what is important is that they might think in advance, even ask them to write down the questions that they're going to use to ask each other. And this is something they can do in breakout rooms if you're teaching online. And it's something that you can monitor to help them in the breakout room. And so it's an all-round lesson where they're getting input, building up the vocabulary, building up the practice. So that's one example of how we can do a vocabulary lesson. The next thing I want to move on to is to do with recycling vocabulary. Now, this is really, really important at any level, and particularly at the lower levels, because there's going to be a lot of cognitive load here with students being presented new language all the time. So they need help to go back to revise and to help them to memorize this vocabulary. So if we look at this one lesson we've just looked at, they was just completing a form with personal details. They've got vocabulary associated with personal details. They've got to revise phone numbers. They've got to revise the alphabet. They've done emails, and they've done a little 6 questions to help them with the question answers for getting personal details. And all of that vocabulary can be revised in lots of useful ways. It will come up again in later lessons through the materials in the book. It can be revised through the photocopier materials that the teacher has. The students will have self-study vocabulary sheets as well for every lesson. So that's very important that they have those for their usage. But I think we also, as teachers, can do a lot more as well with recycling vocabulary. So I'm going to look at today. So the reason why we need to recycle vocabulary is to do, again, with memory. And the ways we do it, some of the key features are that there should be cognitive depth. What I mean by cognitive depth, I mean that students have to make some kind of decision about the language. Now, a very simple level we saw at the introduction to the lessons earlier, that is simply matching. It can be simply matching pictures and words. A deeper way of connecting with the language is the meaning is by them then putting the words into sentences. And then even deeper meaning is this second option where they're using personalized use of the language, where they're writing their own sentences or making their own sentences with the language. And if we can get our students to do that with their vocabulary learning, so they've got their own vocabulary records, where they're keeping records of new words, maybe they're writing example sentences of new words, that's absolutely brilliant, because that's really going to help them with depth of understanding and meaning and recall. Repeat encounters. Students, for language learning to be really effective, students need to see words and phrases repeatedly in different contexts, in different reading situations as well. So again, in the course book, we build that feature in, but you can also build that into your classes as well. Retrieval practice, so number 4. And what I mean by retrieval practice is actually asking students to recall words. So very often we spend a lot of time as teachers trying to push more words into students, and perhaps not giving them enough time to pull words out of their memory. And so I'll look at some examples of how we can do retrieval practice, but it's very, very simple. And then obviously space practice is really, really important for retention of language, that they see the words in different classes over different days, over different weeks. And it's something you can do in class and something you can encourage them to do when they're revising, their own vocabulary notes, their own flashcards, or whatever the system they're using. So those are very important concepts for memory and vocabulary learning. I'm going to give you a little vocabulary game now, and this is one very simple back to basics vocabulary exercise, and it's the odd one out exercise. And these are all words from units 1 and 2 of A1 level, and each group of 4 words, one is different in some way, and they have to choose which one is different. Now, there's a little trick to this, because you might see an obvious one that's different, but if you look again, you might find another item that's different. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just choose one of those 5 groups, just choose one, and write in the chat box which one you think is different, and if you can see another possible answer to that question. Yes, Wednesday for number 1, marketing for number 2. Those are very clearly different. You could have an alternative answer for number 1 and number 2 as well. Have a look again. Yes, yes. Well done, well done. Yes, some people in number 2 are saying good. Okay, okay. So what's interesting about this is when you write these kind of exercises as a teacher, you kind of have a right answer in mind, but we all see different things. And I love this kind of thing, because if I get my students to work on this type of, it's very simple exercise to put together, the first one, number one, for instance, they'll go, okay, Wednesday's different because it's a day of the week. But then they look again and go, oh, actually, sales representative could be different because it's two words and the others are all one word. So there's different ways of looking at it. And so provided you can give me a good why, I think that's a perfectly valid answer. Number two is the same, isn't it? Because you've got, okay, marketing is different in number two. It's obviously because it's not an adjective, it's a department. But then somebody said, oh, yes, but good. Yes, of course, good's different because all the others end in ing. So this is really, really useful practice for our students because they're processing the language, they're making associations. So these kind of exercises are very, very generative and very useful for allowing time for memory work. I think this is a really, really important part of our lesson planning, that we allow time for memory work in the classroom, and we give students the opportunity to think about that outside the classroom as well. Now, this is great because not only is it the teacher generating these things, but then you can, if you're online teaching at the moment, get the students into breakout rooms to come up with their own little tests for each other. So then they can go into a breakout room with one pair together, and then they could go into a breakout room with another pair and test each other. So this is a lot of memory work going on with students, and lots of kind of deep learning of vocabulary in a very, very simple, basic way. So I like doing this kind of thing for memory work, and this is all a case of basically making time in class for games, quizzes, and mini tests, right? So I keep myself a list of the type of games I can do in class, and then I kind of, when I'm making my lesson planning, I'm looking at where I can put them in, and obviously particularly at the beginning and at the end of the class, but there actually can be other places during the class when you can put them in. So right at the beginning, refreshing their memory from the previous class is really useful. And the thing about quizzes and mini tests is that they are a retrieval practice. And I think what's important about this retrieval practice, you're getting students to recall things. Again, if you get them to work in pairs, they learn from each other with this. They kind of recall more as well. And what's important about these things is that they're at low stakes, they're non-threatening, that they are little things that they're just doing in a gamey sort of way, that they're not assessed activities. And I think that they're really powerful, not just from the kind of class dynamic point of view, but also from the memory point of view. There's two very important things to remember there. Okay, so the kind of things I do in terms of games are things like true-false games. Might give them a little, little simple sentences about myself, and then they have to decide they're true or false. Again, that's something they can do for each other. So that's very easy to generate, again, as a little game. Things like jumbled sentences, gap-fill sentences, picture quizzes. Obviously, you've got your Kahoots. You can do lots of things with Kahoot. I sometimes like to do what I call quick fire questions. So maybe from that class, we've just seen that lesson where they've just seen with the personal details. In the next class, I might come in and I might just go around the room saying, okay, what's your postcode? What's your ID number? What's your whatever? Yeah. How do you spell stuff? And I'd go around and give these quick fire questions, maybe 5 or 6 quick fire questions. And then I would say to them afterwards, okay, can you remember the questions? So then they have to write them down, check them with each other. And then I'd get them in pairs to ask each other the questions. So it's really useful just to have that, build in that time for memory work. Okay, so let's go on to the next section, which is about speaking practice and the whys. Obviously, the whys are that students need to survive in very basic situations, everyday situations at work, and we can make sure that the classroom is relevant to that and useful for them. And also, we need to get the kind of quieter, less confident students feeling that they can speak in English in that low stakes environment in the classroom, so then they feel more confident when they go outside the classroom. Ways we do this? Well, speaking drills, there's lots of different ways of doing speaking drills, and at very low levels, these are essentially fluency practice. They're speaking fluency practice. They're giving students an opportunity to practice the language, to rehearse with it. They're helping them to memorize really formulaic language, like the expression that we have here. They're helping with pronunciation. There's all different types of drilling that we can use. There's a lot of variety of drilling. We don't just have to do the same thing all the time. If there's any of those that you're not sure about, do ask me in the question at the end, and I will come back and explain the procedures. And then the other thing that's not on the list here is this idea of silent drilling. Sometimes we kind of expect the students to be producing all the time, and it's nice if they get that space to just listen to something in their head. So silent drilling is when I might say something, and then before they repeat it immediately, I go, wait, in your head, say it in your head. And if they say it in their head first, when they actually do produce it, it comes out more fluently, it comes out much better, much more accurate. So it's very interesting that they're having time to rehearse, even if it's silent rehearsal. I think that's very, very important. Okay, so to carry on then, let's look at another technique, which is the shadowing technique. I'm going to give you an example of that for those who don't know how this works. Again, very, very powerful for low-level students to give them lots of speaking fluency practice. Okay, it's great for pronunciation, word stress, intonation, and rhythm. So again, this is minimum preparation for a teacher, because you just take a small monologue or part of a monologue from the audio in the course book. This is from, as you can see, A1 Unit 1 Lesson 3. And what we would do with this is students would listen to the first part of the procedure is listen and read. Just listen and read. Then the second part of the procedure is that they're going to listen and then repeat after the speaker. Now, they don't do the whole thing. What you need to do is break it down. And the punctuation helps you to break it down here, in fact. But, up to 8 to 10 syllables is enough for them. So if the speaker says, I work in the factory in China, then pause there, and then the students repeat that. Then the next part, in the manufacturing division, pause, the students repeat it, and so on and so on. You can see, you can go through, break it up and let the students repeat it afterwards. And then what they're doing at this time is they're just mumbling to themselves. This is private drilling. It's not public drilling. They're doing it for themselves. And then what they can do, what's really nice, not just in the classroom, but then they can go out to breakout rooms and practice it together and then check each other's pronunciations. A lot of peer learning going on there. They can, at home, they can do this at home, which is great because they've got access to the scripts, they've got access to the audio. It's a technique that they can develop themselves at home to improve their speaking fluency and their pronunciation. So it's a really, really useful tool for speaking. And the other one, obviously, of course, is different types of dialogues. A lot of the speaking they're going to be doing is going to be dialogues from the course book. When they've seen a dialogue, they've heard a dialogue, then you might use, I don't necessarily use the whole dialogue, I might just use 4 to 8 lines of a dialogue. And I would choose a section of a dialogue where I think there might be particularly challenging pronunciation, or there might be quite useful language I want them to look at. And again, it's a case of, you read the dialogue, and in pairs, they rehearse the dialogue with the script in front of them. Now, I think the important thing to do is every time they repeat it, that you up the challenge in some way. So I might say to them, okay, cover over the first 2 lines and see if you can remember what you said. So they're kind of looking up rather than looking down at the text. They're using their memory. Jumbled dialogues are good for that as well, that they're kind of unjumbling it. That involves a bit more work maybe for the teacher. But they can unjumble the dialogue and then say the dialogue. And then maybe you can turn some lines over and say, okay, try it again, but without, see if you can remember what was there. They can turn it back quickly if they need to. Disappearing dialogue, again, is where they've got a dialogue on the board and you start on the whiteboard or whatever system you've got online and taking words out or covering words over, whichever system's easiest for you. And again, this is really, really challenging for students and it's really good fun. So half a dialogue. Creating your own dialogue, the last one, we'll be looking at that in more detail now today, an example of that. But again, if you remember, we said right back at the beginning, students are going to need prompts and they're going to need models and they're going to need scaffolding at this level. And we can see how we can do that. Let's move on to, again, from that. Okay, let's look at the work skills. This is related to the speaking now. And we're going to look at some examples of what kind of work skills that students can carry out at A1 and A2 level. And the kind of things that we've got from the global scale of English are things like A1 can welcome a visitor, greet, offer, and react to news. That's in the first unit of A1 level. They can, the second unit we're going to look at now, which is they can talk about their jobs and work routines. And we're going to look at that, how that's going to be scaffolded today in this another lesson here. In A2 level, students can do things like make simple work agreements, place an order is another lesson, presentations. They can do simple presentations as well as basic work skills about their company, about a product. So there's lots of ways that we can help students develop these work skills. And I'm going to go through a lesson now and show you how this works. So here's a lesson from Unit 2 of the A1, and it's lesson 4. And they're talking, the lesson outcome is learners can talk about their jobs and work routines in a simple way. So we're starting out again with a very simple task of matching the picture to the situation. And then they're going to think about what you might talk about in each situation. You can see the first situation is new colleagues talking by the coffee machine. And that's the one we're going to focus on in the lesson. So here we have the next exercise is where the students are looking at the conversation that's going on between these students, these colleagues at the coffee machine. And all of this language has come up in previous lessons, so they're recycling language again now. But it's a good reminder for them before they go on to a more extended speaking task later. So they're going to look at this, they're going to complete the question answers, and then you might get them to do a little bit of dialogue practice together. Then they're going to watch a video. Now, in this video, they're going to see this same situation. Two people are meeting, a new colleague at meeting somebody at a work situation. So then you're going to watch it first without the sound and see if they can predict some of the things they're saying. And that's, again, getting them to recycle the language from the previous exercises. Then they're going to listen with the sound on, see if what they talked about was what they thought. Then exercise 4, they're going to get more detailed listening, where they're going to listen for some of the key information from that. And then there's a little personalized question at the end, and if you can see there, which says, which job do you prefer, Andreas or Jack's? So what I should mention actually as well with these dramatized videos, that they're a mixture of accents. So Andrea is German and Jack is British. So there's a lot of different accents, but they're all totally comprehensible accents in the videos. From the video now, we're going to go on to some useful language. And if you look at this, you can see how formulaic it is what they're doing here. And you haven't even seen the video, but I'm pretty sure you can probably answer all of those phrases. You can probably complete all of those phrases yourselves. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this little language, these little functional language items, is that they're very, very generative. So if we look at number 7 here, that sounds, we can put a whole number of different adjectives in there, and that becomes, for students, that becomes very personalized then when they're doing their own activities, that they get to use their own ideas in those phrases. The next thing then is to give them a little box with the language in, how to start a conversation, asking questions, showing interest, very, very important. How do we show interest in a conversation with something natural, and how do we finish a conversation? So they've got these 4 clear structures there, 4 clear areas to help them with their speaking task at the end here, which is it's clearly scaffolded. They're going to write a dialogue in pairs of 2 colleagues meeting at a coffee machine. And here we've given them choice as well, which is really important, that they can either be one of these invented characters, or they can be themselves, or they could even invent their own character, whichever they want to do. What's really important is they're getting time, again, if you're going to breakout rooms, to write down what they're going to say, to rehearse what they're going to say, to practice it, and then to get feedback from you as you're monitoring the different groups. And then you could put them maybe again into a breakout room with another couple of students, or in bigger groups, or whatever, into different breakout rooms, actually listens to each other's dialogues. And I think what happens sometimes with this is very useful, is that with a lot of these dialogues, if you can give students a reason for listening, so simple things like spelling names, or saying numbers and things like that, that students can listen and write those down as well, is very, very useful. Okay, so that then, just to recap then for today, so we've looked at what are the A1 and A2 levels. They're not complete beginners. They start with false beginners and coming to elementary. What they can expect to do at this level in terms of very simple, everyday, routine tasks at work. The very importance of cognitive and affective factors in language learning, and why that's so important for these low levels, that we can help build their confidence and we can help them with learning strategies. We've looked at how we present vocabulary, what is high frequency vocabulary at these levels. We've looked at how it's important to recycle things so that students are helped with their memory, both inside the classroom and to strategies for outside the classroom as well. And then we've looked at the last two items really go together in a way, the speaking fluency, how we can maximize speaking time in the classroom through things like drills, through shadowing techniques, through different types of dialogues in different ways. So there's a lot of variety that going on. And also obviously how we can support students with some basic work skills. Now, I'm sure you're probably all wondering if you've picked up all the flowers. So here they are. We started with poppies, then we went on to daffodils, and then we went on to tulips, and then a wildflower here, daisies, and then irises, bluebells, cherry blossom, and roses. So those are all spring flowers, and it's spring here, and probably not spring where a lot of you are at the moment, but I hope you enjoyed the flowers. And I'll let Richard come in now, and we can go through some of your questions.
Margaret, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello, Richard.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Margaret?
I can't hear Richard. I'm going to see if I can look at the chat box myself and see if I can find some of your questions, okay? Okay, so here's a question. Let's have a look. Is there any native language with beginners? Yes, 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 yes. No, absolutely. Yes, if that question is about the videos, then yes, the videos are. There's a lot of native language speakers in the videos, and also some non-native language speakers as well. So there's a German speaker, there's a Japanese speaker, there's a Brazilian London speaker. So I think it's important that you're going to be in international workplaces. You're going to meet people with lots of different accents, so it's good that you've got an international mix, an international feel.
Margaret, can you hear me now?
What else are there more questions here? Oh,
Margaret, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Okay, so what is a carousel? What is a carousel activity? Yes, a carousel speaking activity is a way of repeating the same activity, but with different students working together. So if you think of like two circles, a kind of inner circle of students and an outer circle of students, that's where the carousel comes from. And they're working in pairs opposite each other. And you might have a task like that where you say, what's your postcode, what's your ID number, etc., etc., and they're writing down their answers. And then they're answering each other and writing down the answers. And then what you can do is you can get one of the circles to move round one. And then they're working with a new pair, they're working with a new partner. So basically they're repeating the same activity, but they're doing it with a new partner. And so that's very useful for repetition and also changing partners. Okay.
Margaret, can you hear me now?
Same question. How often do I need to use native language with low-level students? I think what you're asking me is that should I be using the first language, the language that obviously rather than just in English. And I know this is a very important question because it's very, people feel different ways about this. The way I feel about it is I don't use their language. I don't use, I'm in Spain, so it would be Spanish or Catalan where I am. But what I do, if it's, if you can see it's going to be more efficient and I see it's going to help the students, and they ask me a question in their first language to check understanding, to check meaning of something, to ask me a question about whatever, then that's absolutely fine for me, and I will answer that, and I might answer them in English, and check with them they understand. They might want to translate it to say yes, they do understand. If I'm giving instructions, for instance, in the class, try to keep it as simple as possible, but then I might check that they've understood the instruction by asking one of the students to translate it. So there's things like that that I do. Yes, I do L1 when I can see it's going to be, it's very, very important tool. It's very helpful for students. And I think, but what I don't do is I don't speak I don't mix languages. I just speak in English, and I let the students use L1 if that helps them. Then that's absolutely fine. If that's going to make it quicker for them and easier for them, and it's going to, you know, relieve this, help them build their confidence, absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with it. Okay, what else? What is back chain drilling? Yes, so back chaining is when you've got a slightly longer phrase like the one you saw there, which is can you repeat that please? Is when you start at the end of the phrase. So you'll start with please, and then that please, repeat that please, you repeat that please, can you repeat that please? So you start with the word at the end, you drill that, and then you add to it. And it's a very effective technique, and it really helps students to go from the last word backwards to the first word, adding on a word each time. So please, that please, repeat that please, you repeat that please, can you repeat that please? Works like that. That's back chaining. Okay, what else have we got? Oh yes, mumble drill. Mumble drill is literally that. The students are talking to themselves. It's private. They're not performing out loud. They're doing it to themselves. They're saying to themselves what their word is, and they're getting it right. They're not being forced to perform openly. This is really important for confidence building for a lot of students as well, that they're having this private time to drill the pronunciation and feel confident that they're getting it right. So that's what mumble drill is. And also what you're doing in the shadow technique as well is maybe they're mumbling to themselves after they're repeating a bit of the text. Okay, what else? Can you come on speaking drills, Sir Dad? Yes, how to modify in varied classroom member. I'm not sure I understand that question. Sorry. Yes, what I think of L1 use in the classroom, like I say, you know, if it's efficient, then I'm all for it. As a teacher, I don't do it. I let the students use it. It's a tool that they can use to check back with me. It's a tool that I can use to ask them to translate and check they've understood something. So I do use L1 as a tool. I definitely think it's really, really important. But obviously, if you've got monolingual classes, then yeah, why not? You know, completely. But what I tend to do is keep in the English frame. And you know, sometimes students don't actually realize I can speak Spanish, although I'm answering them. They're asking me a question in Spanish and I answer in English. By the end of the year, they can still go, "Oh, you speak Spanish." So it's kind of like, I find that great. If I've got through a year and the students don't realize I can speak Spanish, I think I've done a good thing there. So I think it's really, really important for the teacher is to try and stay in L1, in English. Let the students use L1 as much as possible. And if you do feel you have to somehow clarify something, it's going to be quicker, it's going to be more efficient, then absolutely use L1, use the first language. The best interesting homework for adults, in your opinion? Well, I kind of like to give, that's a good question. Again, another good question. Yeah, I think give regular homework. You know, give homework that is sometimes that's kind of what I call compulsory homework. This I definitely want you to do, and then give them optional homework. You know, the kind of learner strategy stuff as well. You know, do some. Go back and listen to the audio again. Do some shadow, do some shadow techniques. Do some mumble drilling. Do some, that kind of thing. You know, do check. You know, test yourself on vocabulary. So I kind of like to give them kind of another thing I think is really good homework for work students is for in-work students is to get them to do something at work with the language. So I mean, literally go up to a colleague at the coffee machine and start a conversation and react to something they've said in English if you've got colleagues, international colleagues, and then say goodbye, walk away. I mean, that would just be fantastic if they can use it in the real world. And when I go into companies, I work in companies, sometimes, you know, students feel really empowered by these useful chunks of functional language. And if I come into the building and they see me, they automatically you know, will greet me in English and ask something, you know, personal, and it's really, really nice, you know, that they feel confident to do that. They're not just doing it with me. Hopefully they're doing it with other colleagues at work as well. I can't hear Richard. Someone says they can hear Richard, but I can't hear Richard for some reason. So, okay, I think that's it. Yes, yes, use their native language. Yes. I think I've given a bit more detail there about shadowing. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. You've been really, really, you know, great participants. And if I've missed any questions there, I'm sorry. There is a blog. There are more webinars on the Pearson website as well to do with low-level learners. There's another one for the A2 level. No, I can't hear. Now, why can't I hear Richard? I have no idea. Oh, that is strange. Richard, I can't hear you. And I don't know why that is. What is Richard saying to me? Perhaps people can help me. What is Richard saying to me?
Sorry about this, everybody. It's I'm not sure why Margaret can't hear me, but I think we've come to the end of the webinar now. So thank you so much for attending. I would like to thank Margaret herself, but I don't think she can hear me, unfortunately. I think that may be it for today. Margaret is doing another webinar next week on how to teach advanced learners.
We don't actually send out the PowerPoints, but you will get the webinar, so it'll all be you know, online. You can look back at it. Yes, I think vocabulary is a priority because it's at this level. It's really the bricks of vocabulary of communication, isn't it? You know, the grammar is the cement, but the vocabulary is what's going to help you be more communicative, even at a very simple, basic level. Thank you everybody for attending the session. Oh, right. So some people have asked me to explain a little bit more of the shadow technique, so I'll do that again. So the basic shadow technique is get a short monologue from, for instance, from the course book that they've done already in class. And then students read it, listen to it first. And the second time when they listen, afterwards they repeat what they're hearing. So it's very important to break it down into 8 to 10 syllables. And it's very clear usually what those syllables are. So they'll be, you know, indicated by comma, by full stop or whatever. So you can see where the kind of tone groups are. So students listen first, read, hear it in their heads. Then you hear a piece of it, a chunk of it, and they repeat it afterwards. And you do that with each chunk. And then what they're doing is they want to at home record themselves and compare what they said to what the speaker said and see how they're doing. Or they might want to you know, work in breakout groups together and listen to each other. So it's a very, very useful speaking fluency pronunciation technique because they're going to be trying to copy the rhythm, the intonation, and the speed of the speaker. I think that's that. Richard. Oh, that's an interesting one. Do you recommend modeling dialogues orally before presenting the written text so that students can receive the correct pronunciation and not try to work out the pronunciation for themselves from reading it? Before presenting the written text that students can receive. Okay, well, I think I might do is drill a few words that I think are going to be difficult, but I don't think we need students to actually produce it until later. It's kind of, you know, yeah, when you're introducing your vocabulary and you know they're going to need to speak later, then at some point you're going to want to make sure that they know how to pronounce words correctly, and you might do some work on individual words to help them with that. Absolutely, things like surname first, things like that. But you don't want to do it too soon before they're actually going to get a chance to put it into practice. I think that's the important thing. And I think, you know, depending on what type of learner you are, lots of learners like to see things written down. So I think that's important too. Okay, I think we're pretty much done there. Thank you, everybody. You've been so very, very sweet. Very, yes, a business partner has a learning management system. It's the My English Lab system. It's the same system that it's got Active Teach as well, which is where it's a digital version of the course book. And with the My English Lab, students can go in and look at all the materials online, the audio listening, etc., the video. The teacher can also mark the students' grade books. So for online, for blended learning and for online learning, yes, you've got that. You've got a learning management system, and it's Pearson's learning management system. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's been great talking to you. I'll hand over to Richard so he can sign off for today, and keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure you're all doing a great job out there.